Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new CTO talk. My name is Cornel Fatulescu. I'm Chief Platform Officer at Pentalog, meaning I'm in charge with products and technology aspects of our group, our strategy group. And welcome to this new CTO talk, where we invite special guests, special technology leaders doing the work in technology. And we ask them basically the same set of questions again and again, so that eventually we will have some comparative answers that we will publish in the future. And that's half of the work. So I have this set of questions right here. And half of the work is you asking your questions in the chat. There is a Q&A feature in Zoom that you can use. And I will interrupt our guest when your questions come and kindly ask him to answer your questions. Now, we have for today, Horia. Horia, please join the stage and tell us a few words about yourself.
Hey, Cornel. Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. It's a real honor. I hope it is going to be an interesting experience for everybody involved. Just a very, very brief intro about myself. I'm a director of engineering at Bolt. I have been with the company for 4.5 years now. Started out as an individual contributor as an engineer, and then moved into management about a year in, and kind of have been riding this management wave ever since. I actually joined at the midpoint of the company's lifetime. So the whole company is about 9 years old now, but it was a much, much smaller place back then. I was actually engineer number 40 and employee number 256. And of course, it was a much simpler place. Right now, we are, let's say, several thousand employees, more than 500 engineers, and a bunch of product managers, analysts, and what have you. We have a lot more product lines, a lot more operational complexity, business complexity, even a lot more processes than we did back in the day. So I've been very privileged to be part of this wild journey that the company has had. Before this, I worked at Stack Overflow for about 2 years, and before that at Google, and before that I did school, essentially. So let's say perhaps 10 years of experience in this industry. So needless to say, I'm very fresh, if you will, in this whole engineering game, and even in the first quarter of my career, if you will. So really excited again to be here, and hope you all will have a great time.
Yeah, we will, as we usually do. So I will start with my first question. How can you define briefly the director of engineering at the Bolt?
Okay, super. So it's actually a tricky question to answer, and there's a bunch of angles I can offer you here. So it's worthwhile knowing that Bolt is a very typical technology scale up in this way. So we do things in a similar way to many other companies. So the director of engineering is a manager, but they are a manager of a relatively large team. So at least 50 people we kind of take as an estimate, and then it's a level 2 manager or even a level 3 manager. So somebody who manages other managers, or even managers who manage other managers. And in my case, or in my and the other engineering directors' cases, we report to the head of engineering, who then reports to the CEO, and I'm responsible for one particular product vertical that we have. In my case, it is the platform teams, and this is mostly an internal product, a set of services such as maps and identity and trust and user verification, campaign technology, marketing technology, that all of the other business verticals use in order to build their products in a more efficient way. So ride hailing and delivery and Bolt Market and the rentals people all use our technology to build their own products. We have both, let's say, an infrastructure layer, if you will, and a user-facing layer as well. And I have, of course, a product counterparts and operational and the business counterparts, and together we form, if you will, the leadership of this group. But overall, I am responsible for the whole thing working. So if something is going wrong in that part of the organization, it's kind of on me as well to try to fix it and contribute in any way I can to the solution. Otherwise, just like any other manager at Bolt and any other manager in a technology company, I'm in charge of the vision and the strategy of the group, how we construct teams, how we, assign people to teams, where we assign them, in which geo, in which location, if you want juniors, if you want seniors, how we do team growth, how we put, certain people in certain places. Of course, there's the traditional aspect of delivery quality, so making sure that we actually deliver the software that we promised we would deliver on time, on budget, with the appropriate level of quality, etc. Technical aspects, making sure that the thing is scalable and we keep all of our SLAs. In our particular part of the world, there's also vendor relationships, so dealing with contracts and cost managements and budgets and all of these things that you kind of need to do when you use this external services. There's also as again, for any managers, there's some work on company processes and making sure that the thing actually works the way it's supposed to work. So, promotions or compensation reviews and stuff like that. But these are essentially stuff we expect from all of the managers to handle. It's more like the scale at which you handle them. And some people work on bigger groups, other people on smaller groups. If the group is big enough, then you're called the director and you have more problems. But more or less, because of the environment and because things are changing so fast and so often, there is a big part of the role that's simply reacting and making sure that whatever's happening and whatever the fire of the week is going on, you kind of are on it and you solve it, regardless if it's just some facility issues or, when the war in Ukraine started, that was a whole thing because we had people there. So essentially, you have to be present in all of these things. You also have to be a bit like forward-looking as much as you can and prepare the group for next year's fires and next year fires as well. But essentially, it's not all set in stone, and whatever comes at you, you kind of have to figure it out.
And from everything you said, which are the responsibilities that suit you the most, and which are those who you say, I'd rather delegate in time?
So I would say I have worked a lot in the last couple of years on the people part, on the processes part, on technology. I have not focused as much on the product aspect, if you will, or business development and things like that. It's mostly a historical accident, if you will. I can say that I don't like it, therefore I didn't do it, but you kind of have to roll with the punches here and work on what's, the fire of the moment. And that was mostly scaling up. In fact, I would say 90+% of the managers are grown internally, and this is their first manager job as well. So a lot of us were learning on the job. So this was perhaps the biggest challenge we faced in the last 2 or 3 years on this engineering side, just scaling the organization, making sure people know how to do one-on-ones, how to do performance reviews, how to do all of these things. So now that we've become, all of us more mature and better at the job, we're also starting to focus more on other aspects of it, higher level aspects such as product vision, strategy, where we are going to be in 5 years and all of that stuff. If I could, give something away, if you will, it's the spreadsheets. Like if I had somebody who, to fill all of the spreadsheets and take that work away from me, I would. But there you go. It's no pain, no gain, I guess. But I would say realistically, you kind of, life advice, you have to be decent at all of them. At a certain level, you cannot be actively bad with any of these responsibilities that you have, and especially the major ones. So if you suck at communication, if you're not a people person, if you cannot be organized, if you cannot transmit a message from leadership to the people who actually do the work, then you're going to have a bad time in this sort of job. You need to excel at some for sure and use your strengths where you can, but you cannot suck in this core responsibilities that you have.
And from the things that you like the most, and the spreadsheets part, how much can you tell us a bit of the ratio of are the spreadsheets 20% of your time, 5% of your time, half of it?
Yeah, so this couple of weeks, they're more than half, I would say. We are doing our quarterly planning, so there's a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of numbers to add up. Usually it's not as big, and I would say most of my time goes into people management, to be honest. So if I look at my calendar and if I look across a whole year, it's mostly people management. So doing one-on-ones, doing perhaps coaching sessions, having staff meetings with my whole group, having skip level reports and all of those things. So easily half of my calendar is full of this sort of meeting work, where, sometimes you discuss operational work, but many times it's just like, people stuff, personal stuff, their problems, my problems, what's going on in the organization, what I can tell them, what they can tell me, exchange of information, if you will, but also, just talking about how are the kids, how's the family, this sort of stuff that you especially during pandemic times really helps to make a feeling of connection, whereas you could rely on just being in the office before. So again, and it's fun. Like it's a fun thing that I honestly did not think I would like coming into this management role, but I've come to enjoy the most out of all of this job. Just being with people, helping them grow, them helping me grow, and kind of building something together, like the organization, building it together.
You've given me so much food for questions here. You've talked about vendors, time and budget, fires, but I will stick with my journey here. So if the audience is willing to ask questions about a particular area, please don't hesitate. Yeah, I'm usually asking next about the translator role, Horia. So to whom are you translating technology usually, and how much what's the part of the job? Is it important? Is it less important? Yeah, please develop here.
Yeah, so there is a part of that for sure. I guess a little bit of context setting is in order before I go into the rest of the spiel. Essentially, Bolt is a technology company, but it's very different from your Apples and Facebooks and Googles of the world, because we move atoms around, cars and food and people and all of this stuff, essentially. So perhaps we're more similar to Amazon than to the other purely technology companies. And a lot of the work that goes into the company is operational in nature. So people who actually speak with drivers, who understand markets, who launch new markets, who set things up in a particular market. So they're doing a lot of this very important work, and they could be potentially seen as the business side of the work. However, the kind of input that they're giving us is not necessarily product-focused input. They're perhaps giving us feedback on how the product is working in the market. They're very much in contact with regulators and all sorts of local authorities, and we kind of have to listen to those people. But that's just one part of what makes a product. The other part, I would say, comes from us product and engineering people, and essentially is very self-directed. So we don't have feedback from, let's say, the CEO, from some executive that we're launching this big new initiative or that they want to launch a new product. Rather, how it goes is, somebody on the product or on the engineering side has an idea for a product or a project or a feature, and they kind of champion it and they argument for it and they kind of justify it, and then they get all of the approvals and all of the understanding to do it, and then they kind of go ahead and build it and launch it and iterate on it and what have you. So there is, if you will, translation, of course, more in giving to the people in my team the context of the company. So to give you an example, in the past, as we all knew, it was very easy to raise money from institutional investors. So all of the company were focusing on getting a lot of money and deploying it in order to expand and grow really big and capture the market. Now things have changed because of the global economic context. So many companies, or most companies, are focusing on profits and becoming sustainable or growing in a sustainable way. So this is a big piece of context that we are also, of course, reacting to, and that we need to translate from the leadership level down to the team level. So certain projects that perhaps made sense in the past when money was very cheap don't make sense anymore, because we need to focus on perhaps cost optimizations or on growing in a certain way or in certain markets, etc. Or in the past we were perhaps supply constrained. We didn't have enough drivers or couriers or whatever. Now we might be demand constrained, so we don't have enough riders or users because the dynamics of the marketplace shift, and that also drives what sort of projects we need to build. Are we going to focus more on the riders and give them the features that they like, the types of control that they need, or are we going to focus on fleets and drivers and all of that stuff? So all of these things are important. They're kind of coming from leadership, from their vision and their understanding of the market, and they need to be translated to the people. But it's nowhere near as, hey, we need to do this project and this other project because the CEO said so. We have, let's say, a good track record of ignoring what the CEO says and kind of going our own way because we understand, or the team realistically understands better their problem domain and kind of takes it in the right direction.
Just to complete this area before going into several questions that we already have, thanks to the audience. So if I understood it correctly, there's lots of things in translation also coming from the top to the teams. Is there anything in particular that you can recall and share with us, like an example from things that were from the bottom up, like something that you've seen as an opportunity and had to be, or you thought it was important for the company to engage with?
Okay, so I would say most of them, to be honest. So most of the decisions, most of these big product pushes are actually going from the bottom up. Let's give, I don't know, an illustrative example, if you will, of this sort of work. So a bunch of quarters ago, perhaps a year or more, the team that was working on our customer support tooling, which meant tools for customer support agents and the interaction regular users had with our customer support functionality, came to the conclusion that our provider of this service, our external provider of this service, was both very expensive and not really what we needed. So they made the choice and kind of the judgment call to replace it with an internal alternative built by us, which sounds very wacky at first glance, because this is a company which is worth several tens of billions of dollars. They have thousands of developers working on this problem. How are we going to compete with that with something internal? But they made a good case. We had a good track record in our platform group of doing exactly that. So we have our own internal maps, which are big alternative to Google. We have internal verification systems and other systems that we built ourselves because we know us best and we could do it in the right way and the most efficient way. So this was another example of this sort of work. And they had the justification, they had the numbers, they had a plan on how to do the rollout, and they had the plan essentially. So they argued it, the leadership bought it, and now we've essentially, we're not 100% there, but something like 90% there in replacing the old vendor with this new internal solution. And this has also allowed us, among other things, to extend it to more than customer support use cases. So a lot of the work that we do is kind of customer support like, so you can use the tool in these places, whereas before you wouldn't even think of using this external vendor for this type of work. So it kind of paid off in spades here, but it was essentially top down. Like nobody told us from leadership, hey, replace this tool. It was like team saw a problem, they formed an argument, they had the good justification for it, sold it to leadership, executed well on it. This is critical, because otherwise they don't give you the second chance essentially. And then they're working on their next hit right now, as it were.
Someone asked here, because you said about replacing something which was bought with something that you built. Where do you see yourself on the spectrum of buy versus build?
I would say, if you were to sample all of the teams, both my platform teams and other horizontal teams, we call them, as well as the infrastructure team, we are towards the build side. But ideally, how it goes, we even have a model for this stuff. So you kind of see that people start using an external vendor for something. And then you see that both ride hailing is doing it and rentals are doing it, and all of these verticals need this sort of stuff. So you come in and say, hey, let me take this problem out of your hands and we're going to make it great. And then your first job as a newly formed team working on this shared problem is to kind of modulate the external vendor that we have, add a couple of other vendors so we are not dependent on any one of them, and transform their very generic functionality into something that we do internal. So something to kind of give an example here is in our geo and our maps infrastructure, we initially made use of the Google Maps APIs that are very generic routing and address search, but solutions. But we needed routing for when you're searching for a car and you're looking at all of the cars around you, and you are like a single person sitting here and want to see which one is the closest so you can dispatch it faster, which is a very business specific problem that the team owned. And how they solve the problem, they go to Google and they use their APIs. But once you start doing this stuff, inevitably you hit into a cost barrier, so it starts becoming very costly, and a functionality barrier. So again, speaking of Google, they have a very generic routing solution, but we know that essentially a car is moving, it has a certain driver profile, so we want to do more with that stuff to optimize our business. So at some point, you can have a very good justification that you can replace this stuff with some amount of investment. So you know that essentially you have this very narrow functionality and that you can more or less implement it on your own, and you go ahead and you do it. And once you've done that, you usually unlock a lot of internal you reach level 3, if you will. You unlock a lot of internal potential that you didn't have. So in this CS case, you can start using it for other types of workflows. In the geo case, we used to limit the number of drivers. We ranked very aggressively because it was very expensive to rank more. But when we had our internal router, we could start ranking, all of the drivers in the city because it was cheap, essentially. It was free to do it. So you do this sort of qualitative leaps once you have this tool. And the final stage is to a bit like kill your creation in a bit and realize that you cannot simply rely on this efficiency and cost optimization story forever, and you have to start building something new, essentially, and something more problem oriented. And a bunch of the teams, for example, are in this stage where they've done all they could in this term and are moving on to the next challenges, which are more business oriented.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes, by the way, sometimes it doesn't work like this. So for payments processing or for SMS sending, that's too complex, too big of a problem to actually handle in this way. So for the foreseeable future, that's something that you just farm out to vendors, and you modulate their service, but you can never hope to replace them at our current scale. But ask us again in 2 or 3 years, and we'll have a different story.
Okay, I'll go to another question from the audience. And yeah, by the way, I prefer the Q&A feature. I just learned how to use it. So how do we avoid overlaps between director of engineering when we also have VP of engineering for people and or CTO for tech?
Okay.
So yeah, what can you say about it?
So in the case of Bolt, there's only one VP of engineering, and he's my boss. That's his title, essentially. And we don't have a CTO. So, no problems in this way. I would say we have a pattern, if you will, for every manager, they have a tech lead, and every senior manager who is a manager of managers, they have a group tech lead, a sort of architect. And then every manager of sorts has also a key technical person that they delegate this technical decision control, if you will. And that means making sure the systems are at the right level of quality, doing design doc reviews, enforcing certain standards, etc., etc. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility. So if you nominate the bad person and they don't do a good job, then it's on you that you did this sort of bad nomination. So you cannot get away from that, but you get a bit of help from this, setup that we have. But we don't see as much overlap, if you will. And we try to say whenever there is some sort of functional overlap, either on the product side or between people working on the same problem, we try to fix it so that we don't have the overlap. But overall, we are very frugal and usually very thinly stretched among the problems that we have. So it's not that there isn't another problem you can be working on. There's a lot of them.
Daniel is asking here, is the role more operational oriented, or does it also focus on development side, enhancing or creating platform core apps?
Yeah, so it has all of it, and it ebbs and flows in time. So sometimes it's very operational, just making sure that the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, making sure delivery happens the way it is supposed to happen, and all of these things that you would say are day-to-day operational stuff. Sometimes it's about speaking with a new vendor, or extending, or even starting a new team or a new sub business line, if you will. So it's more strategic in that way, and more higher level, if you will. And sometimes you even have to think 5 years in advance, where do you want to be, which for us is a very long planning horizon. For other companies, it might be a short one, but for us, it's like the very, very distant future. But sometimes you have to think of that as well and kind of work with all this kind of planning horizons. Obviously, we are a scale up still and the market is very dynamic. So the narrower and kind of more, time bounded you can be, the better it is. So don't, go chasing for the big castle in the sky, focus a bit on the present, and it's usually the better choice.
Speaking about operational team, usually I'd love to get the same questions and answer, but you are here to answer to them, but not to the next question. So why are all the spreadsheets in 2022? So very happy you are answering to that.
Oh, damn. Like you have to learn to love the spreadsheets. It is a wonderful, wonderful tool. Like this is an experience I have had multiple times where people said, oh, you're doing all of this stuff in spreadsheets. It's bad. Let me get you a custom-made tool for that sort of problem. And the tool is just much worse. Like there is something magical about a spreadsheet that it is so flexible and you can turn it into everything you want. At some point, sure, you reach some limit, but I found that limit is when you're running an internal process with hundreds of spreadsheets, or you're running a big part of the business like that. But even now, like there are some, I don't know, financial planning products that we have internally that essentially are run via spreadsheets. And my guidance to the team working on them is, okay, that's a great input. You just automate the back end of that, but don't try to take people's spreadsheets away from them because they are so nice and they have this, flexible and extensive interface. So yeah, like I'm a fan of spreadsheets and I don't hate them that much. I hate when they are laborious and you kind of need to copy information from one place to another and all of that. But if it's like an original creation, then it's a great thing.
Yeah, thanks for the answer. I'm looking at one of the questions. I'm not sure it should be. Someone is asking for discounts. Have you experienced any difficulties to switching to a managing role, like between the brackets, imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So yes, imposter syndrome for sure. Difficulties, to be honest, and this is going to sound really kind of like bragging, but not really, because I had the great luck to start with a really great team, which essentially is still with us, and they're all either managers themselves or tech leads or staff engineers or what have you, and they were just like really great engineers, great developers, really easy to work with. So my initial team, my initial start into management was really easy in that way. And I only encountered, let's say, the traditional problems you encounter of low performers or difficult situations or people not getting along really late in my management career. And overall, like my whole group is quite harmonious in that way, and we don't have a lot of people who hate their guts or who are problematic or who cause all sorts of issues. So it's a nice way to start management. I realized that if I had started in a much more difficult situation, sure, I would have learned more, but it would have been much more probable that at some point I would say, bro, this is not for me. It's like I need to go back to coding because that's where the fun is, and not stay with management. So I don't know, it sounds really bragging, but it was a really nice start to the career, having a nice and super strong team.
Do you still code?
For my own projects, yes. I have a kind of an extension to Notion. If anybody is using Notion, shout outs to you. And I use it to kind of run my life and organize my my schedule and all that with it, but not within Bolt. They have told me to stop coding. So I took the hint, kind of a year too late, but I took it.
Do you spend time with executive management, like the executive officer at Bolt?
Yeah, so he's, my skip level manager, as it were. So we have a skip level one-on-one from time to time. We meet in various sync up meetings as well. So just tomorrow, I have 2 meetings with him, one for a review for one of our big teams and another for some budget discussion. So we do have this sort of one-on-one time, but it is much more operational in that way. It's not the same skip level that I'm doing with my skip levels, if you will. It's more like, it's a different sort of thing because his job is much different than mine.
Okay. And about efficiency. So that's not the thing that we usually do in startups, scale-ups. We tend to forget efficiency management. What can you tell us about efficiency at Bolt and how you see efficiency?
Oh, that's actually an interesting question because it has 2 sides. So on the one hand, if you look at our products, which are mostly ride hailing and food delivery and rentals, like they're in a way very commodity products. Like you get a car, it takes you from point A to point B. You want it to be safe, you want it to be a nice car, but that's about it. So what differentiates one player from another is essentially how cheap the service is and how fast the car gets to you. That's what we would call our hard value proposition to our users. And in the case of food delivery, you also have restaurant selection. So if you have more restaurants, that's better. But they're very, again, like they have this commodity notion to them. So one way that we differentiate from other players in the market is that we are, we want to be very cheap, so offer low prices for our users and then high or lower commissions to our partners. And we kind of get to do that by being extremely efficient internally. So for all of the measures you might be thinking of efficiency, we're probably number 1 or number 2 among our peers, or Ubers, Lyfts, Didi, all of these companies that we are competing with. And it actually translates to our engineering culture. So we are not a lot of engineers. We're about, 500 plus. And we work on many projects. We need to prioritize very aggressively. We have a lot of infrastructure set in place such that, when you're starting a new project, all of the technology choices have been made for you. It's TypeScript, it's MySQL, it's Redis, it's Elasticsearch. It's the same framework. It's just a different business logic. You're using our own kind of services for customer support and geo and all of that stuff. You're not rolling anything on your own. You just need to focus on what's important, which is business logic. And then there's, like, I would even describe it as a platform as a service in the sense of Heroku or Google App Engine that takes all of that complexity away from you, and you just, you ship it to production, you worry about some scaling issues, but that's the long and short of it. And all of this essentially means that we can do more with less on the engineering side, which very directly and also indirectly leads to us having the lower prices and the better value proposition for our users. So, that's one point where this efficiency of ours is really important. And we don't want to waste resources. We don't want to spend a lot of money on random stuff. On the other hand, you also don't want to be somebody who is very obsessed on reducing costs and kind of optimizes everything away. And many times this means that with the systems that we build, they're not the most optimized ones. They have a bunch of tech debt, and it's okay to take on that tech debt. We have a bunch of, systems that are just plain ugly or don't work as well as we wanted them to, but they work good enough. So we don't, spend a lot of time optimizing them further, and kind of by time we also spend cost, but we kind of leave them as they are, and they kind of help us work well. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way, but it's actually a competitive advantage. It's not just, being frugal for the sake of being frugal. In this sort of business, it's difference between, number 1 and number nothing, essentially.
Efficiency in general is part of the governance along with other policies. And is governance obsolete?
So I guess governance has a very, very broad understanding. Mine is perhaps narrower, is mostly around, we said we were going to build something. Did we actually manage to build it? Or even in more let's say in more important terms, we said we were going to have an impact. We were going to have a certain amount of profit or move this metric by this amount because we did this work. Did we actually manage to do it? And in that sense, it is a very important topic, just to, you know, make sure that we are honest with ourselves, that we can be accurate in the things that we predict. And it's, yes, part of my job to make sure that that's the case. So we have reviews internally, both with the group and with the wider leadership, where we kind of go over, you know, what did we do, what did we learn, what we're going to do better next time, besides all of the stories on retrospectives, process audits, and all of these things that you kind of need to do in a standard agile environment. So if you're thinking of a bigger type of governance, where, you know, you speak with external auditors and things like that, and they make sure that you're doing the right stuff, you of course do this sort of stuff as well, but that's a bit outside of my area of expertise, if you will.
Someone is asking here about KPIs. How do you deal with KPIs? Can you give an example, please?
So it is quite a custom approach. We have in our group, let's say, iterated our way to something that we like and we are comfortable with. So there's two aspects of it. One is a set of KPIs that we call, or they're not really KPIs, they're just some important metrics that we track, and we call them the operational metrics. And they are very much around making sure that the systems that we build are running as well as they could. So they might be things like ticket handling time in customer support, or the number of failed searches in Geo, or the quality of our SMS infrastructure, how many messages we actually manage to send versus how many are received by users, and all of those things you kind of want to keep a tab on, and you usually want to look at them very holistically at the level of a group. And you're mostly interested here in keeping them at the right level and them not falling to some dangerous level. Then if you're looking at particular teams, so they're what you might call in team topologies fashion stream-aligned teams. So they own some portion of our product domain, usually some narrow portion of our product domain, and they have a bunch of KPIs that they are very interested in. So perhaps the Geo Places team that deals with all of our address search and all of things around the addresses and the address database, they care about the number of searches that were successful and out of all of the searches that were done. Or the customer support team that handles automations cares about the percentage of automations that actually manage to succeed out of all of the automations that we have defined. And these are KPIs that they actually work to optimize. So in a particular quarter, this is our planning horizon. Usually they have some projects and they say, we're going to build this stuff and it's going to move this metric from this level to this level. And then when the next quarter comes, they say, we build this stuff, and then that metric actually moved just half because, we didn't manage to roll it out, or our estimates were off and things like that. And that's the KPIs. And usually each team has 3 to 5 KPIs, ideally less and not more, and one KPI, extra KPI or extra measure that each team has is a measure of impact, essentially. So at the end of the day, how much profit did the team add to the bottom line, either by increasing the size of our revenue, or optimizing costs, or doing something that helps out with this sort of stuff. And you kind of look at things like ROI metrics, how much are you spending with the team, how much are you getting back, and we have some guidelines on where you'd want to work here. But that's kind of the level of KPIs that we have.
Are you using a specific tool?
Spreadsheets, again, spreadsheets and Google Docs. Okay. That's fun. We don't use any more advanced methodology here like OKRs or anything like that. Some of us would want to use them. Some of us have been burnt by them in the past. So it's still an open field, but it is something that we constantly iterate. So if you ask me how the process was a year ago or 2 years ago, radically different. We've kind of slowly, quarter over quarter, gotten to some place that I think is more stable and nicer, but it's not a static target. It's going to move.
Have you engaged with Dora Metrics?
We have. So we know about Dora Metrics. The thing is that, and this was again one nice technical choice that was done way back in the archaic period of the company. We had CI/CD right from the start. We had microservices right from the start, and essentially even today, when the system is much more complex, you can do, multiple releases in a day as a single individual for our backend services, for our data services, and all of those things. So we had a lot of this, nice to have features, or great to have features from the get-go. So for us, TORA metrics aren't as useful. Like in my experience, I found them useful for the kind of companies that do releases once every 6 months, and they're these big affairs that you have to call the whole company to attend, and they kind of get them to the point where they're doing releases once a week or once a day or what have you. But for us, they're more like, yeah, we're good, they can make us better, but they're not the most critical ones. We are looking at better developer experience metrics to understand how our developers are interacting with the system, what sort of frictions they have, where is the hurt, and they actually lead us more towards testing infrastructure or tracing infrastructure as bigger problems for our developers. Like how do they debug and how do they test the system, rather than the release, which are, again, you can do many of them a day if you want.
Very briefly, how do you define, what's your definition about technical debt?
It's like real debt. It's a tool that you should use. You shouldn't have a lot of debt, because that's bad and you're going to end up in a risky situation. I would say it's equally an anti-pattern to have zero technical debt, because it means you are very, very much, not moving fast, to be honest. Like you need to have a good setup here. Like an advice I can give, and something that works really well for us, is have an understanding with leadership that a certain percentage of your capacity in each quarter or each planning horizon that you have is purely engineering driven work that you use to fix the issues that you yourself caused in the past, or to work on some migration or fix some architecture issue. And then it also it gives you some room, and you don't need to justify these projects very much. And it's also a great way for engineers to start to think a bit like product managers, because now they have to choose between their engineering projects, which one survives, which one doesn't. But it's also a great forward looking tool, because this is the capacity you have, 20-25%, if you will. And then if you're thinking of taking on debt, you can also plan how you're going to repay it, because if you want to take too much of it, then I'm not going to be able to repay it with just this amount of tech debt. I either need to renegotiate with my leadership or not take it at all and build something nicer. And then if you manage to somehow not have technical debt, there's always other stuff to do. And these sort of agreements are useful for UX quality work, for on-call, for even our infrastructure group kind of has this sort of agreement where they get a percentage of our total headcount, and they figure out what they want to work on it, and we kind of trust them that it's the right idea, but we don't judge them in the same way we would a product vertical that needs to bring impact assessments and ROI calculations and projections and all of this stuff, because they cannot provide it easily. So there you go. Hopefully it was brief enough.
The audience, I hope it was good enough also for you. You've yes, no question. Team topologies. I've heard it. You recommend the book? Yes or no?
Two thumbs up. Read the book. Apply the book as well, not just read it.
What is leadership at Bolt? How do you define it?
It's hard, honestly. It's a bit like you kind of know it when you see it. So I wouldn't venture to give the definition. The kind of stuff I like seeing is people take ownership. People, after they have taken this ownership, they should, execute well on it, have the vision for it, define something that we haven't thought of before, and then convince others that it's the right idea. And it can work both on perhaps the more traditional management path, but also on the individual contributor path. And we expect this sort of leadership for people who are more senior, of course, but whenever we find it with anybody, we kind of cherish it and encourage it, and we don't stifle it. Like, this is one of the things I really like about the company, and it's still the case right now. And it was something that was frustrating me in the other places I worked at. Here, there is not a lot of this feeling that, this is not your problem to solve. You worry about your stuff. We're going to worry about our stuff. Rather, if you have an idea how to solve a problem, if you solve it before, be our guest, solve it for us, and kind of we're going to be super happy. So one thing is our performance management process, which we did in our own group, and then we exported to the rest of the engineering organization and now the company, because we didn't have anything, and the people wanted to have something at least. So I didn't have any experience here, but I wanted to do it, so I did it, and then it was like a good thing. Some other things aren't so great, so your mileage may vary, but you don't see this thing that you are squished essentially if you want to stick your head out of the trenches and do something extra. So the best definition of leadership is just figuring the stuff out that we're missing, actually building it and kind of solving the problem, and then doing this repeatedly, and you're gonna get to a lot of nice places.
Where do you have your developers?
We have a couple of hubs. Main one is in Estonia. We have a big one in Romania, about 100 developers. One in Poland. The newest one is in Berlin, but it's also pretty big. But then we also have, and one in Tartu as well, which is another city in Estonia. We also have a bunch of people just spread out over Europe, from Portugal all the way to Sweden, and in between we have people spread out. We're not a remote first company. We are remote friendly, if you will, but we have these people more or less spread around the world.
There's a question from Gary here. What is the main challenges you have when you are dealing with teams from all over the world, like Romania and Vietnam, for example? But I think for you it applies perfectly.
Yeah, so funnily enough, all of them are kind of in the east of Europe. So it's culturally similar. There are of course differences and what have you, but you're starting from a nice point, and it's also the same time zone, so most everybody can attend all of the meetings. You don't have people on the West Coast or in Australia or things like that, so a lot of the logistical challenges are solved. I would say the biggest challenge right now is for the team to actually feel like a team rather than just a group of people working together. There are some teams who are actually distributed teams, so the team made the choice that they want to be all over the place, and they have people in the hubs and outside the hubs, and for them we have special support for them to meet more often, to have summits where they get to do the team activities that they wouldn't. Otherwise, we do try to cluster a bit the team. So whereas I might have teams around the world, then a manager would work to keep their team in a certain location. Or if they open up a new location, with time they would want to form two teams there that they manage, and that you at least have some semblance of this team social life and team gelling that is so important. This is what got us through the pandemic, I would say, that we had a lot of the teams that were in this place. So going full remote for so many months was easier because the teams were already in a good place and they just needed to carry that over in the online space. And if you look at various team satisfaction metrics, you can see that people who started right in the heat of the pandemic, they have consistently lower scores than people who started before or after, because they just were hit by this unfortunate event really sadly.
A question from the audience. I saw you're building real-time systems at crazy scale. Is it hard building low latency systems that need high levels of concurrency?
Sometimes it is. Most teams won't be exposed to this sort of stuff. And when they are exposed, it's rather this type of embarrassingly parallel type problem that you can solve without a lot of issues. But there are a couple of teams that need to deal with many thousands of orders a minute, many millions of requests a minute, and things like that. For them it's a bit harder. One of the things we also noticed is that modern hardware is really powerful. Like, we are running, I don't know, Redis clusters on 2 or 3 machines serving millions of requests a second with very low CPU consumption and low resource consumption in general. So modern hardware is quite a beast. If you actually want to use it to its full potential, it scales quite well. And then modern software is quite powerful as well. So for us, we are in the process of transitioning right now to something called Titanium DB, which is a sort of new SQL type database. But before this, and still to a large degree, we are using MySQL. And even for the biggest workloads that we have, it manages quite well, like billions of rows, terabytes of data, replication, high availability, like it does all of this stuff. It's not a perfect piece of software for sure, but it is much more powerful than people give it credit. And where it kind of doesn't hold up, you kind of shard it geographically in our case. And the problem is of such a nature that you can do that, and it's nicer. So so we actually don't have any NoSQL database. I mean, we have Redis, so that's perhaps a NoSQL database, but that's mostly used as a cache. But we don't have Cassandra, we don't have Mongo, we don't have any of these NoSQL databases because MySQL is good enough for this operational workload.
Do people see you as a direct problem solver or more like a facilitator for problem solving?
I want to be the facilitator, essentially. So I don't want to be there and kind of go in, use my knowledge, use my connections, use my formal power to solve the problems, rather help them solve these problems. Sometimes you have to be expedient though, so that's where I usually intervene. Sometimes the fire is so big that you kind of need all hands on deck to solve it. And sometimes there are certain problems that only I can solve through the virtue of my job. So if we're doing things like, I don't know, performance calibrations, that's kind of on me to solve. I cannot delegate this sort of work or teach another person to do it. Or if we want to open a new hub, it's kind of my boss's decision to actually do this stuff. He cannot delegate it to anybody else. So there are not a lot of these decisions to go around.
If you surveyed your people, you've interacted mostly in the last 12 months. What would be the one skill they appreciate the most?
Okay, so it's about doing many things at the same time. I would say I have I don't know, just a lot of things going on at the same time. I have my own system. I advise everybody to have their own system, whether it's a notepad or something crazy in Excel or Trello or Jira or whatever, but have a system because there's just too many things to keep a track on. Like I cannot keep, I can't keep track of the bills I have to pay, let alone all of the stuff that happens at work. So I have a system and it allows me to kind of incrementally work on these projects. Sometimes they go into a dormant state. Sometimes I work more actively on them. And it's also something that people don't like because there's just, when I have some free time and I kind of start working on them, I kind of bombard them with, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to kind of handle this stuff. And it's kind of messes with their flow. So
I suppose this, if we ask what are the things they dislike the most, is the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully that's the answer and nothing else. So there you go. But it is it's something that you probably have heard about, the manager schedule versus the maker schedule. You cannot be fully on the manager schedule for sure wherever you are in a management position. But the bigger your team is, the more you have this big projects that go on for a long amount of time, that you just make incremental progress when you can, and you just need to juggle a lot of the balls at the same time. So have a system.
Your main priorities for the end of the year?
Okay, so there's a bunch of them. We have to finish up all of the hiring we started this year. We have to finish a bunch of nice projects in our group, and mostly I would say right about October, November, we start thinking of next year. So we shift a bit our focus from the problems of this year to the next one. So budget planning, new teams that we want to spin up, new projects that we want to take on, all essentially take center stage and start sucking all our time. I also have a sort of separate goal setting process with my team where we figure out all of the stuff that we want to essentially improve about the way we're working, from how we do, I don't know, our delivery process, to how we track certain metrics, to how we, I don't know, keep our spreadsheets up to date, and who we hire in which locations, etc. So all of this kind of go into a big tool we have for goal tracking. It's not its primary purpose, but that's what we do. And essentially all of that becomes next year's problems. And then as the year progresses, it kind of changes dramatically. So not a lot of the stuff that we had at the start of last year actually made it to the end of this year, but it's more like about doing the work rather than the output itself.
Speaking about the next year's problems, what can you say about sustainable IT?
So it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and as I don't know, software is eating the world, if you will. The resource demands, as I say, made by purely computational efforts are going to increase. So it is something that you kind of have to start thinking about, like the work that we're doing actually has an environmental impact, if you will, or needs to be done in a sustainable way. So there are places where even from the technology point of view, we're thinking, is this the best way of organizing things? Is this the best way of running things? And the more efficient you can be here, the better it is for everybody. It also ties in well with, let's say, the mission, if you will, of the companies is to make cities nicer by more or less solving this problem of private car ownership and the fact that there are too many cars on the streets. And of course, it has a kind of ecological aspect to it as well. Because if you take cars off the streets, the cities become nicer. You don't emit as much carbon dioxide, as much, bad stuff into the air. So it ties in with this stuff as well. So we can justify some amount of our work essentially by saying, hey, if we do this thing, we're not going to use as many machines, or we're not going to use as much CPU. And our infrastructure team actually has work to do on switching over to ARM machines, because they're more efficient, they're cheaper, and you can actually they're greener as well. Or we want to use a better essentially data lake, and that's going to result in less energy consumption, etc. It's not, we're not going to solve anything by ourselves, but it is a nice thing to actually think about from time to time, that you can actually influence this, big global problems.
I hope everyone heard that. One last question, 2 minutes, Horia, from the audience. With as many devs, so as many developers as the company has, each with many ideas, how do you make sure you don't lose out on good ideas that could become great ideas?
It's a tricky thing to be honest. So you say that there are a lot of developers, but they honestly don't feel as much. I was reading some article about Stripe about 2 or 3 years ago, and Stripe is a massive company by this point, and it was big then. And they also had 500 developers, but they had a team essentially working on a Ruby type checker, which to me was really advanced work. They had a lot of systems in Ruby, so they wanted the system to increase their reliability and safety and what have you. So they had a team working on this project. Like, you'll find none of that at Bolt. Even though we are 500 people, we are much more spread out, and each team feels like it's just barely scratching the surface of the work that it can do. So in each team, essentially, because they are aligned to a problem, we want people, and we expect them to be very aware of the problems of their domain, and that's the best place that they can actually contribute. So they should understand their problem domain as well as a product manager, essentially, and they should be able to talk with anybody about their metrics, KPIs, vision, etc., as well as the product manager, and then contribute there with ideas and drive projects, etc. It becomes harder if you're somebody in rentals hardware and you want to contribute to maps. It's going to be, of course, harder. You have a better chance of transferring to that team and working on those problems, but it's a problem many companies face. But overall, we like when people have this sort of product ideas. They need to be justified and what have you, but we don't say, oh, this is just your job to think about this stuff, or developers should focus on coding and not on ideas. Everybody should have ideas, and in the end, because we also have this engineering part of the roadmap that we have, everybody can contribute even at the small scale with small fixes, small engineering problems, and kind of build their muscle for this sort of bigger contributions.
Good. I'm also preparing a talk about it, so I'm going to add you as a, this is how Horia said, what Horia said. So yeah, one last thing about the technology recommendation, but very, very quickly. Before something that you recommend to the others, hey guys, look at this, and girls.
Okay, I would say typing on the one hand, microservices and micro architectures, micro front ends. On the other hand, only if you've done them before, not if this is your first rodeo. And there's a lot of power in just using basic technologies and pushing them to the max. You don't need to go with the fancy programming languages, databases, infrastructure. Just use your basic stuff, which, by the way, is pretty nice nowadays, and you're gonna get a long way. You don't need extra problems. Use your innovation tokens in another place, like on your product, and on making your users happy. Don't focus so much on the technology part, unless you're building technology, in which case, don't take advice from me.
30 seconds about the IT market in Romania.
It's still pretty hot. It still sucks to be a hiring manager. Enjoy the rest of your 20 seconds.
Yeah, so we are heading to the end of our session. So thank you everyone for joining us. And Horia, please, one last thing, something that you'd like the audience to live with as your advice, the most important advice.
Oh, damn, this is a hard one. I promised I would think about it, but I didn't. So I would say the stuff that I've noticed here very much that I didn't in the other places I've worked is just how important culture is. So if you have this sort of place that actually lives by its culture and you actually use it in the way that you argument, the way that you fight about projects, the way that you define your way of working, it's something like a superpower essentially for the team. So definitely try to live those values and build the values in your company that you actually can use day to day. Not fuzzy values you print on the wall and then you never use, but real values that you use every day. And that's, for example, what we did. We just saw what we were doing every day. We put them in a list, and then we'll continue doing them because that's the way we did it always. So don't think that it's just some fluffy, corporate speak. It's actually really important if you manage to use them in your day-to-day life. And you as managers, you can actually make that change because you are the people in power. So you can live those values and then everybody will follow you. So don't undermine you by not living these values.
Thank you, Horia. Dear audience, that was it. This is Horia. Connect with him, ask more questions. I really enjoyed having you here, Horia, and maybe we will have you again in 1 year and see if something changed.
Yeah, super. I hope my advice lives to the test of time. It was really nice being here with you. I really like the questions. I really like the audience interaction. There were a lot of them and a lot of really good questions. And thank you for having me. Hope you all had a good time today.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.